It is now my pleasure to introduce our student speaker, Courtney Humphries. Courtney, please step forward. Courtney Humphries, you are an engaged scholar and citizen whose work embodies UMass Boston's mission to create new knowledge while serving the public good of our city, our Commonwealth, our nation, our planet. You are a non-traditional student who began your graduate program mid-career. You were a science journalist reporting on science and urban issues before enrolling as a PhD student in 2017. At UMass Boston, your research has addressed several critically important environmental and community development domains, such as mapping vacant lots for social and environmental justice on the Fairmont Greenway project, and balancing urban waterfront development, climate change mitigation, and racial inequality in Boston. Over the past 5 years, your insights on these and other issues have been featured in the Boston Globe, on WBUR's Conoscetti, on PRI's Living on Earth, and many other venues, informing scholars, practitioners, and citizens in Boston and beyond, and literally helping reshape the city in which she lives and works. Please join me in welcoming our student speaker, Courtney Humphries.
Thank you for that introduction, Chancellor. I feel incredibly honored to be speaking to you today. I know that all of you graduating have important stories to tell about your journeys. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story, and I hope that it will resonate with yours. It's a story of connections that have grown over the last almost 5 years that I've been at UMass Boston. Connections with nature, connections with communities, connections with the city, connections with new knowledge, and connections with my family, friends, and colleagues. When I came to UMass Boston, I was already in the middle of a rewarding career as a freelance science writer, journalist, and author. I loved the freedom of journalism, and I was getting more and more interested in certain topics. I wanted to know more about how cities evolve, how they can coexist with nature, and how they can become more sustainable and adapt to climate change. But it was hard to address those questions in any kind of depth. Writing an occasional article here and there was not enough. I received a Knight Science Journalism Fellowship at MIT, which brought me back to an academic environment. I loved it, but I also felt that pursuing any further degree might not fully satisfy me and might limit my creativity as a writer. Then I happened to talk with Professor John Duff at UMass Boston. He told me about a graduate fellowship at the school funded by the National Science Foundation. It focused on studying coasts and communities in a transdisciplinary way. I decided to join a PhD program as an IGERT Fellow. In that program and at the School for the Environment, I found a place that truly made room for different disciplines, interests, and approaches, and that didn't limit possibilities. Being back at school after many years was exciting and challenging. My daughter was born in the summer after my first year. Later, the pandemic hit. I had to balance taking care of a toddler at home with Zoom classes and dissertation research. None of it would have been possible without incredible support from my wonderful family, my advisors, Professor Duff and Professor Alan Wigg, and the other faculty and fellow graduate students here. Their support helped me face struggles and keep making progress that I needed to, even if I had to adjust my expectations of what I could accomplish day to day. The pandemic has affected us all in different ways, but I know that everyone graduating today has a story about the challenges they faced and the persistence they needed to have in order to complete their degrees. When I began my dissertation research, I had a lot of freedom to choose my focus, and I decided to keep it close to home. My dissertation looks at the past, present, and future of Boston's waterfront, how the city is preparing to face sea level rise and the daunting risks that it brings. This research is very personal to me. When I moved to Boston, after growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and living in Seattle, Washington, it took me a long time to warm up to the city, to say the least. The winters were too cold, the food was too bland, and everybody seemed a little too tense. But after I moved to Dorchester and began to explore the waterfronts and learn more about the city's history and its relationship to water, I began to feel more connected to it. I kayaked around the harbor islands with my husband Ted. I rode pilot gigs through the Inner Harbor with the Boston Rowing Center. This helped me to understand how water has shaped the city's development and how its response to rising tides and more powerful storms will determine its future. Studying Boston's waterfront as a researcher has helped me to deepen this connection. And I would argue that knowing more about the city where I live makes me better prepared to understand other coastal cities, communities, and societies. UMass Boston is the perfect place to do this kind of work. More than any other university or college in the area, it is embedded in its community, in this city, and in this region. We can and should strive for world-class research and education, but we should also recognize that our strength comes from the quality of these local connections. My research helped me become more personally embedded in my neighborhood, in my city, in my physical environment, and in my fields of interest. This connectedness has been really satisfying, and it's made me realize what I don't like about the metaphor of a career as a path, or even worse, as a ladder. It suggests that we are individuals, that we travel separately, trying to get to a better place or a higher position, but not really interacting with the landscape that we're passing through. Now, I like to think of a career more like a tree. We might reach higher, we might spread out in different directions, but to do that, we need to be rooted in something bigger than ourselves. As we do our work, we make new connections, we strengthen existing ones, we grow new branches. Sorry. And together, and each in our own ways, we help to create the soil on which other people's work will grow. So as we move on from our graduate school experience, whatever your plans and hopes are, let's think about the larger landscape we hope to be part of and to contribute to. Let's bring the persistence we've shown during the pandemic to our next efforts. And let's connect with one another and grow the landscape we want to see in the future. Thank you.